Welcome, everybody. I'm Terry Minow, Chair of Big Sky 55 Plus. I was the political director of MEA MFT, now the Montana Federation of Public Employees, and I'm a founding member of the Board of Directors of Big Sky 55 Plus. I ranch with my family in the Boulder Valley south of Helena. I'm very excited to have you all with us tonight. It's going to be a fantastic panel, great speakers, and a great wrap up to the legislature. Big Sky 55 Plus was founded to give Montana's older people a strong voice in deliberations about our state's future. We bring people together to work for solutions that make life better for Montanans of all ages. We have had remarkable success working with lawmakers to pass good bills, like the lawmakers who are here today, and working with lawmakers to kill bad bills, holding lawmakers accountable, and electing those who work for the common good. We recently helped elect pro-education school board members in Great Falls and in Helena, and we helped pass the mill levy in Kalispell. We also bring Montanans together in inspiring and empowering events like our statewide Whistle Stop Tour for Social Security and our Gathering Wisdom Building Power Conference in Billings. You'll hear more about our upcoming events later. Tonight's town hall topic is Legislature 2025 wrap-up. We are fortunate to have three excellent panelists who will walk us through some of the issues and stories from the legislative session. If you have questions for any of our panelists, please put them in the Q&A box, and that's at the bottom of your screen. By the way, this is being recorded for playback later, and it will be on our website. Our first speaker tonight is State Representative S.J. Howell, Vice Chair of the House Human Services Committee of the Montana Legislature. Howell is the Executive Director of Catalyst Montana and has worked on 3 successful campaigns to pass Medicaid expansion. They have managed 3 cycles of civic engagement with low-income women. Representative Howell, take it away.
Thanks so much, Terry. Hi, everyone. Really great to be with you today, and glad to be participating in the legislative session wrap-up. I'm going to cover a handful of some of the bigger topics of the session, and then Representative Thane will take some of the other bigger topics. Happy to answer any specific questions if you got them, though, so get those in the chat. I'm going to start with an issue that's obviously near and dear to my heart, and that is healthcare. We all knew going into the 2025 legislative session that Medicaid expansion was going to be one of the bigger issues that we had to deal with. And, you know, I'll just start off with some really good news. That effort was really successful. House Bill 245 was the piece of legislation carried by Representative Ed Buttry out of Great Falls that would lift the sunset and make Montana's Medicaid expansion permanent. Before we went into the session, you know, we were concerned about a variety of different potential challenges. So amendments to the bill that made the program less accessible or, you know, limited benefits, other types of compromises or challenges getting that bill through the session. But we really saw that folks showed up ready to work, both, I think, advocates and citizens, as well as legislators. And House Bill 245 flew through the House and the Senate. It was on the governor's desk by mid-March, and it was signed into law by March 27th, before we were even 2/3 of the way through the session. So, you know, that was a really big success, and I certainly was heartened to see that we were able to get that done without a lot of difficulty, without a lot of challenges along the way. And I would say healthcare overall as an issue area saw some other successes as well. You know, we did see a couple other bills related specifically to Medicaid expansion. We saw 2 bills that were brought that would have limited or ended expansion, and those bills died pretty quickly. One bill that did pass that is concerning to us, it raised the age of the work requirements that we have in state law that, of course, aren't in effect right now. Right now, those work requirements are for folks 55 and under, and this new bill, which was passed and unfortunately signed into law, raises that age to 62. We also saw some other bills outside of just Medicaid expansion in healthcare that I think are really useful. House Bill 399 by Representative Jonathan Carlin deals with prior authorization. There are actually a handful of prior authorization bills that passed. These are really aiming to speed up the healthcare process, to stop doctors from having to spend so much time on prior authorization, and to protect healthcare consumers from, you know, finding out that they can't get the care that their doctors have prescribed them. There were also a few other bills that looked to invest in and stabilize Medicaid. Some of those passed. One that I'll just draw attention to is House Bill 880, which would have created a Medicaid stabilization fund. This is an idea that a number of other states have done to, sort of sock away excess revenue in years when revenue comes in high, in case we see challenges at the federal level or revenue come down, that it can help stabilize Medicaid. That was a great bill from Representative Mary Cafaro. It passed and was vetoed by the governor. So that's a quick wrap up on healthcare. There was a lot else going on in healthcare. Those were some of the highlights. I want to take a minute to talk about the judiciary and attacks on the judiciary. I think this might be perhaps the most dramatic issue area of the session, although Representative Thane will let me know if he thinks maybe that's property taxes. Maybe they're tied. But we knew going into this session that our colleagues in the Republican caucus were really set on attacking the judiciary. This is in part because there was a special select committee created over the interim that brought up over 24 bills that changed the way our independent, nonpartisan judicial branch operates. And obviously, the biggest push of this was to change the way we elect judges from nonpartisan elections to partisan elections. We saw 5 bills specifically aiming for partisan judicial elections, and every one of those died in process. And that, again, I think is a huge victory and really a testament to all the work that went into that issue, from folks making phone calls and sending emails to showing up and talking to legislators to, the willingness of legislators to sit down and work together. We also saw, in addition to just the partisan elections issue, we saw a lot of other bills about how judges conduct their own business, everything from Judicial Standards Commission to ways that cases are handled or moved between venues, substitution of judges, you name it. We saw most of those bills. And of the nearly 30 bills that were brought, all but about 6 died in process. So really, really successful again in pushing back on those attacks. The last area I want to touch on is sort of human rights broadly focused. And, this was a little bit of a grim area. We did see some echoes of the kind of ugly election season and attacks at the federal level. We saw more than a dozen bills attacking LGBT Montanans, but for the first time in 3 sessions, we also saw a handful of those bills die. So again, a little bit of a mixed bag, but really some progress there. We also saw bills attacking immigrants and refugees, attacking the separation of church and state, particularly in education. We saw bills attacking DEI. And some of those bills passed and, they might face legal challenges. But again, a number of those bills were defeated in a bipartisan fashion. And so I think at the end of the day, despite some really tough bills and some bills that we shouldn't even really have been debating, I do think that my big takeaway is that there was some bipartisan consensus that we should focus on the things that were really important, and we were able to knock down some of the worst of the worst. So I'll stop there and happy to take any questions if folks have them.
Thank you so much, Representative Howell. Remember, If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box below your screen and we'll do our best to answer them. Representative Howell, I had a question that I wanted to ask you. Montana had such a big lift to remove the sunset on Medicaid expansion, and we did it with strong bipartisan support, as you said. Now we see a bigger threat to our healthcare at the federal level. What are your thoughts about blocking that, or about where things stand with the big bad bill?
Thanks for that question, Terry. I'm really concerned about the federal budget reconciliation bill. The big bad bill is a good name for it. It has the potential to kick thousands of Montanans off their healthcare overnight and really do a lot of damage in the long term. More bureaucracy, less healthcare. That's sort of the name of the game. And all really in order to give even more tax cuts to the super wealthy. Um, in terms of what I think our chances are at blocking that, I would say I really don't know, but we need to give it everything we have to try. I do think that as far as I know, the effort in the Senate still seems to be to move quickly to vote on this bill in the Senate before the July 4th recess. So the next 2 weeks are really of the essence. I think that you can see the bill passed the House 2 weeks ago with only one vote, and that is a very tight margin. And I think that means that there is some leverage there for us to push hard. I think the bill polls really poorly, so the more all of us can make our voices heard to say this isn't what's right for Montana, that's the best shot that we have.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to go on to our next speaker, and we'll get back to Representative Howell and some questions later in the program. Our next speaker is Representative Mark Thane, a Missoula native and University of Montana graduate. He had a 39-year career in Missoula's public schools, retiring as superintendent in 2019. This year marked his third session in the Montana Legislature, representing House District 89, Missoula Lolo. His legislative committee assignments included House Taxation, House Education, and House Agriculture. He also served as the vice chair of the Revenue Interim Committee. Representative Thane.
Thank you again for the opportunity to participate. Back in March, I had the pleasure of being with this group to talk about property tax as it was in process. And it's nice to be able to come back and tie a bow on the package. I do want to respond for just a moment to Representative Howell. As we contemplate all that was considered during the legislative session, I don't know how we would possibly say anything was more important than continuing expanded Medicaid, just the number of Montanans that reaches and the people that it targets. But I also agree that the judicial bills and the attempts to make a partisan judiciary, that was a huge win to be able to stop the bills that came out of that interim committee. And as we've seen all three sessions that I've been in the House, we again had the negative bills with regard to human rights. And it's just troubling to me, given all that we had to wrestle with as a state, that we continued to come back and try and legislate social issues that really were not on Montanans' radar and were of little importance. And playing defense for such a portion of time was a challenge. I'm going to touch base on a couple bills outside of property tax first, and then I'll jump right into property tax and I'll do a little screen share. But despite the fact that in knocking on over 3,000 doors as I campaigned, I never heard a single word about Montana's income tax. We did pass House Bill 337 that the governor signed, which reduces Montana's income tax rates. Ultimately, that bill will cost the state of Montana about $300 million a year. And my concern is right now we're in good structural balance as a state, meaning we have enough revenue to cover our anticipated expenditures. But by 2027 and 2028, we're precariously close to having our expenditures exceed our revenue. And the challenge at that point in time would be simply that no one will have an appetite to come back and increase income tax rates. And instead, I think education and social programs will be in jeopardy. And that's something that I think would be a grave concern to all Montanans. We did also have House Bill 831 pass this session, sponsored by George Nikolakakis. That increased the elderly homeowners and renters income tax credit. And I think that's important in that it's really the only way we addressed renters. And in the community I live in, Missoula, more than 50% of residents are renters. So that was an important piece of legislation. We also failed to pass House Bill 154, which was Jonathan Carlin's Housing Fairness Tax Credit, which I think would have been a real important win had we been able to get it across the finish line. We got it through the House and to the Senate. Unfortunately, we didn't get it to the governor's desk. But those are things I think to focus on in the future. So with regard to property tax, and I spoke at length back in March with this group, we had two primary bills that were moving through the session. House Bill 231 came from the governor's task force, was carried by Lou Jones. And you might recall that it began by lowering the effective tax rate to 1.1% and to essentially penalizing second homes by not giving them a preferential tax rate. House Bill 155 was the Democrats' party platform bill, and it had a progressive tax schedule. So more modest homes got a greater tax rate, and then we had increases from there, but looked to reduce the effective tax rate from 1.35% to a graduated progressive scale. Both those bills were introduced in early January. Unfortunately, it took until about 10 days remaining in the session before we finally got resolution. And what ultimately happened was Jonathan Carlin and I sat with Speaker Lear and Majority Leader Fitzpatrick and kind of negotiated a compromise between the two bills. Unfortunately, nobody came out completely happy, which was probably a sign that it was a good bill. We got a number of elements that were important from the Democratic platform bill into the final resolution. And the governor's task force bill, Lou's bill, again, had a number of provisions that were included in the final resolution. What ultimately happened was we took Senate Bill 542 and we stripped everything from it except the sponsor's name and the title of the bill. It was a 4-page bill, and we amended it to a 46-page bill, putting in the various planks that we considered to be important. I'm going to share my screen here for a minute and show you what the effective changes are. So in 2025, we see primarily that which came from the Democrats' platform bill. So we'll have a tiered system, and principal residences will qualify for a $400 rebate, in addition to having a 0.76 effective tax rate compared to the current tax rate of 1.35%. So it's a significant reduction. In the second year, what will happen is the rebate information that's gathered this year will be used to determine who has primary residence in the state of Montana, and that information will then allow those homeowners to qualify for a more reasonable tax rate. But second homeowners will essentially pay a higher tax rate than they currently do. So to take a quick look at what that would mean for us, all land and dwellings, the first 1.5 million currently is at 1.35%. This year, the first 400,000, which is slightly more than the median home price in Montana, will be at 0.76. Then the next increment from 400,000 to 1.5 million will be at 1.1%. And that above 1.5 million will be at 2.2%. But since it's a progressive scale, even those that are at 1.5 million will ultimately be less than they're currently taxed. In 2026, you can see the new tax rates take place. And I think the biggest thing to point out is that we got into the measure that rental units, multifamily units, will be taxed at 1.1%, instead of 1.89. Our hope is again that therefore renters won't experience that increased tax rate. So that in a nutshell is what we're looking at. I'll be happy to answer questions at the end, and I appreciate your patience as we worked through the process.
Thank you, Representative Thane. So a question to start off with would be, how do you assess the legal landscape for property tax, for this property tax compromise legislation? I understand there's been a lot of threats of lawsuits, and what are you thinking might happen?
Thank you. Excellent question, Terry. So the biggest issue that we faced was that Billings has a city charter that limits the mills they can levy. And their concern is that as we change the tax rate, the taxable value of residential property will reduce significantly. And they see potential for a significant reduction in their budget authority. So the bill contains a couple different opportunities for Billings to work around. However, it's concerned right now that maybe neither workaround would be very palatable to voters. And so there's some potential legal action being contemplated based on Billings' tax situation. There also has been some noise made by second homeowners who will actually see a reduction in 2025 of their residential property tax. But then in 2026, when the governor's task force recommendation on second homes comes into play, they'll see a significant tax increase. So there's a question about whether or not that's fair and equitable. The concern I would express there is while it does get to out-of-state owners, there are a lot of farmers and ranchers in Montana who, in addition to their ranch house, might have a second home in town. And there are a lot of families that have been fortunate enough to inherit, you know, the cabin in the woods or the property on the lake. And if it's not a primary residence, it will be greatly impacted in 2026. So there may be grounds there. We'll see what any potential lawsuit looks like and see again if we've covered our bases in the bill.
Thanks, Representative Thane. Okay, we're going to go on to Margie MacDonald. Margie MacDonald is our last speaker for tonight. Don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A section below, and we'll do our best to answer them. So Margie MacDonald is Big Sky 55 Plus's legislative lobbyist and our recent interim executive director. She's had a long career as a community organizer and nonprofit administrator, including 15 years as executive director of the Montana Association of Churches, 3 years as staff director of the Northern Plains Resource Council, and 10 years as regional organizer for the Western Organization of Resource Councils. Margie served 12 years in the Montana Legislature, 8 in the House, and 4 in the Senate. And we are very lucky to have her working for us and now back on our board. So Margie, will you wrap up any areas you feel that we might not have touched on yet?
Okay, thank you, Terry. And I really have been looking forward to this, in part because it just, being away from it for a month and almost month and a half, it gives us a little perspective. And I'll put my comments in 3 buckets, basically. Some of those are going to be a little repetitive, but sometimes that just helps us kind of master the information. So I apologize in advance. One thought is, one bucket is around how bipartisanship delivered some good outcomes for regular Montanans. A second bucket is that bipartisan majorities passed some really great bills, and they have now been vetoed by the governor, and I will highlight a few of those. And then finally, some missed opportunities. There's much work that was left undone, and so much time was wasted attacking the dignity of small minorities in our state, or academic freedom, or libraries, or public health, and we missed some opportunities. So I'll try and scream through this and not go over my time allotment. In some areas, the critical mass of lawmakers was willing to reach across the aisle to do what they believed to be in the best interests of Montana and of their constituents. It was in the face of fierce partisan pressure to stick to the party line. And that took courage. And we've seen in the op-ed pages some back and forth, as you will have noticed if you track on that. And Representative Howell already touched on how important the removal of the sunset for Medicaid is to save health care for 75,000 Montanans. And that had to happen with a real bipartisan majority, and it did. That bipartisan majority also passed a bill to address the residential property taxes and to deliver substantial cuts to homeowners. And Representative Thane got into some granular detail about it, but here's another lens on that. In Yellowstone County, it amounts to $900 per year on a $400,000 home. And in Flathead County, it lowers the tax by $800 a year on a $400,000 home, which is the median, basically the median value of a home in Montana, and $1,100 a year on a $600,000 home. And that is nothing to sneeze at. So in many ways, for median and below, and for several $100,000 above median, it almost made folks whole in terms of what impacted them after the 2023 legislature adjourned and we all picked up our property tax mail. Another area where bipartisanship helped was in holding the line on our Constitution, and both speakers have spoken very eloquently on that. And I would just say that there probably will be some litigation on some of those issues, including Big Sky 55 Plus has joined with Disability Rights Montana to try and redress a bill that will make an extra step that will take dozens, if not hundreds, of votes out of legislative districts and important races in the future just because a person didn't jump through a hoop that is completely unjustified and not necessary at all to ensure the integrity of our votes. And so we will see how that goes. And then the second bucket I wanted to touch on, as was also touched on Representative Howell, are some good bills that were passed both chambers and then were vetoed by the governor. And these included some really important bills to us. Senate Bill 72 streamlined access to home and community-based services for Medicaid-eligible Montanans that would prevent or postpone more costly residential care in assisted living or skilled nursing facilities. It was sponsored by Senator Mike Yakowicz of Billings, and it will be on our scorecard when we share it with you in the near future. We pay a lot more when someone goes into a nursing home or assisted living than we would if we met a few needs for that individual in their accessible apartment or home. House Bill 607 was carried by Representative Paul Tuss of Haber, and it would put hearing aids under our Montana insurance plans. And that is hugely important for older adults because without being able to hear adequately, the transition in some cases to cognitive challenges can really accelerate. And there's quite a correlation there of not being able to hear well and then starting to see cognitive decline. And that bill was promptly vetoed by the governor in spite of a very low fiscal note, which most lawmakers agreed was about double what the actual cost of hearing aids has come to in this digital day and age. Another bill is a small matching grant fund that Representative John Fitzpatrick brought. And it would have addressed capital needs in our senior centers. Many of these centers are a little over 50, 60 years old. They kind of came out of the Johnson era war on poverty. And in Anaconda, the senior center still uses its 1970s era dishwasher. And I think they had hopes of getting a new one, but not if Governor Gianforte has his say. So that very small bill also got cut. And then House Bill 880 has already been discussed, Representative Mary Cafero's stabilization bill. I'll just quickly touch on the last and third bucket, which I think is really important. So forgive me for going a little over. And that is missed opportunities and more work that needs to be done. We hear a lot of lip service that we pay to family values and pro-life and pro-family policy in Montana. Well, I have a bulletin for you. After 2 decades of almost complete partisan hegemony in the legislature, young families are not faring well in Montana. Montana is the 6th oldest state in the United States. That's true in part because we have a lot of us 65 plus citizens, especially in our rural communities, but it's also a fact that Montana has the 2nd lowest birth rate west of the Mississippi. We are not doing nearly enough to support the good folks who are trying to bring up the next generation. We at Big Sky 55 Plus are strongly committed to intergenerational well-being. We support working parents. We support their health care and CHIP for their children. We support affordable housing, public education, and access to high-quality, affordable childcare. The state is right now either losing ground on best beginnings in childcare or coming up far short of what is needed to help working parents. In fact, it costs $18,000 a year per child out of pocket for quality childcare in the state of Montana. No wonder young Montanans feel they simply cannot afford to start a family. And with that, I'll try and wrap it up. I would say we have missed opportunities to progress on increasing our starting teacher pay, particularly in rural areas. We got a little help this session toward that end, but so much money is being siphoned off for tax credits for rich people to send their kids to expensive private academies in the Gallatin Valley or the Flathead Valley, or for huge income tax cuts that Representative Thane already touched on as we flatten our income tax. So I'll stop here. Happy to answer any questions or hear your thoughts. We will soon publish our scorecard, and we are excited to share it with you. And finally, we're just so thankful for our hands-on members who sent thousands, tens of thousands of letters and emails and phone calls to lawmakers on dozens of priority bills. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Margie. So Margie, what surprised you most about the 2025 session? And I think I'll ask the other 2 panelists that question as well. And maybe I just sprung that on you without a lot of notice, but
Oh, I'll just share a moment that was a little bit of a what's the kind of mountain comes to Muhammad moment at the. We have tracked the property tax issue since people got their homeowners got their residential property tax bills in the summer of 2023, and we're gobsmacked with increases that for many people really seriously put them in a position where they were thinking about having to sell or move from their home. And some literally have had to make that move or are making it. But what we saw at that time is the way that property tax works in Montana is that when homeowners' share of local property taxes, which funds our schools and our local governments, goes up, all the big taxpayers on the different classes, like centrally assessed, your utilities, your railroads, your big corporations, their taxes went way down. And this is a well-kept secret in Helena. If you listen to the testimony and the hearings in the tax committee, nobody really talks about it until the very second to the last day of the legislature, when some of those same groups came in to testify against the compromise that Representative Thane talked about that kind of did bring across the finish line a substantial residential property tax reduction. And all those players, the Petroleum Association, the Taxpayers Association, Montana Chamber of Commerce, which represents the big companies, not like some of our local chambers that are mainly Main Street folks. Anyway, they were all in there saying the sky is gonna fall, and we're gonna have a big hike. And to see the 2 of the leading Republicans and budget people on the committee basically lay out for them how much their taxes got cut when homeowners took such a big hit in 2023. And to me, it was a real acknowledgement and recognition of how much, you know, being engaged in tax policy may not be the sexiest issue that we work on, but gosh darn, it has a lot to do with justice. And for me, justice is what we're all about at Big Sky 55 Plus. And it was gratifying and validating to see what we have been saying since July of 2023, you know, brought forth in really effectively by Representative Lou Jones and Representative Steve Fitzpatrick in that hearing on the compromise. And so I'll say that's one of my big surprises.
Thanks, Margie. That's a great one. How about you, Representative Thane? What
You know,
surprised you about the session?
I would say that Margie probably took the wind out of my sails with my moment there. You know, much was made, I think, during the interim prior to the session about Northwestern Energy getting a $36 million tax cut. And it wasn't through any action specifically of the legislature, but it was simply that residential values had increased so dramatically that other classes of property got a tax benefit. And to actually hear the Republicans call Northwestern Energy out when they complained about the compromise because their taxes were going to go up $28 million. And that still leaves them $8 million to the good, yet they were unhappy with that. And I've been disheartened because I see there's another rate proposal coming from Northwestern Energy, and part of their rationale is their increase in property tax. And we didn't get a decrease in our energy bills when they got a significant property tax decrease. But they want to recapture that now for the benefit of their bottom line and for their investors. But again, my biggest surprise moment was to hear Republicans who throughout this discussion had resisted the idea that we would shift any burden back to the other 15 classes of property. And suddenly they were defending that move in the hearing during the last week of the session. Was a pleasant surprise. But I think it also indicates that of the 3 sessions that I've been in Helena, this was the one where I saw the most bipartisan work. We did have some good conversations across the aisle, and as Representative Howell said, some bad legislation still passed. But we also had good conversations to play defense on some bad legislation and to actually pass some good bills.
Great, thank you. And how about you, Representative Howell? What surprised you about the 2025 session?
You know, I would echo some of what Margie and Mark said. I found myself consistently surprised that property taxes, one of the issues that we all knew was a big issue of the session, sat around and saw no real action for like all of the month of March. And we were really negotiating that in literally the last days of the session. I will just share a brief anecdote that still makes me chuckle a little bit. One of the things that I was heartened by and maybe a little surprised by was that I do think we reached a point in the session where collectively Democrats and some Republicans said we are kind of getting tired of a lot of the unconstitutional nonsense, whether it's attacks on vulnerable Montanans or attacks on the judiciary. And there was one moment on the House floor where we had one of these bills that was attacking our judicial branch. And Representative John Fitzpatrick got up on the floor and asked if Representative Steve Fitzpatrick, his son, would yield to a question. And Representative Steve Fitzpatrick did yield. And Representative Jay Fitzpatrick asked, "Is this bill constitutional?" And Representative S. Fitzpatrick said, and this is typical Steve, love that guy. He said, "No, I don't think it is, but I still kind of like it." And then they both voted against it and the bill died. And it was just a nice moment of, okay, we're just going to call it like it is and get this job done. So it was nice to see us getting to that point where, you know, we could break through some of the partisanship and break through some of the expectations that of how folks were going to be voting and really operate with a little more statesmanship and common sense.
That's great. Okay, a question for Representative Thane. The opponents of House Bill 542, the property tax bill that we've been talking about, seem to be dominating the news cycle, and they seem to be framing it as Montana's new second home tax. There's not a lot of conversation about the property tax going down for the average homeowner in Montana. And so what can we do to get the word out about that? Or what are the people who put this compromise together, how are you going about that?
Thank you for the question. We have had a number of op-eds that have come out. Unfortunately, I don't know if it's true all around the state, but if you contemplate what's happened with the Missoulian, readership is well down, and I don't know how much that message is getting out. And so I think we need to think about a new messaging strategy. But I do, as Margie said earlier, I do have a lot of faith that when people get their tax bills, they're going to see a great amount of relief. And when that happens, I think the tide will turn in terms of the discussion. My concern would be that obviously there's potential for a lawsuit to happen prior to that time. I would also just note that July 25th is the date that new property tax assessments will come out. And those assessments, we anticipate market value of the average residential property in the state going up another 22%. But what'll be important is to look at what happens to your taxable value, because it will include the new tax rates, and the math will be done on that assessment notice that you receive. So I would encourage property owners to pull out the last assessment notice and the new assessment notice and compare the taxable value of their home, and they'll see a significant reduction in the taxable value. Unfortunately, because city, county, and school budgets will increase, or for example, here in Missoula, we passed a new emergency fire levy, that will eat into the reduction that we passed at the state. But nonetheless, I think it's defensible. I think we'll have public opinion on our side once people see what the impact is on their residences, but time will tell.
Thank you. Representative Howell, a question from the audience is, so what bills passed and are now law in Montana that restrict LGBTQ rights?
Great question. There are a number of them. One bill that's been in the news a little bit lately is House Bill 819, which is Representative Braxton Mitchell's ban on flags, and particularly, of course, pride flags. This is a silly law that has silly loopholes that smart Montanans across the state are exploiting by making the rainbow flag an official flag so that it can in fact be flown wherever it needs to be. Much more importantly and more seriously, there are bills like House Bill 121, which was the bathroom bill, required transgender Montanans to use the bathroom based on their sex assigned at birth instead of how they identify and how they live their life. That bill was signed into law, but has already been enjoined in court. So there's a temporary restriction on that as the lawsuit proceeds. House Bill 300 was passed and signed into law and also challenged in court. That's a ban on trans kids playing sports, school sports, at both the collegiate but also high school and middle school level. A couple other bills that passed, House Bill 400. This is a pretty nasty bill that has to do with students who ask to be referred to with chosen names or nicknames or certain pronouns, and this prohibits that from happening in schools and other public facilities. That's also got a challenge in court, although it hasn't been decided. In the past, in 2023, we saw 5 bills pass attacking LGBT Montanans. All of them were successfully struck down in court, and I I think that we will see a similar thing happen this time. So even though there are a few more that I'm not mentioning, you know, all of them are sort of very similar to things we've seen in the past and will face lawsuits and I think likely be stopped in the courts.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to go now to Lila. Lila Clemenshaw is going to give us a demonstration. Our wonderful communications director who writes our weekly alerts and sends out the information that keeps us informed. She's going to show us how we can quickly and easily contact our senators and Congress people in response to our email calls for action. So love to see Lila go through this so we can all see how easy it is, which is what people tell us all the time.
Thank you, Terry. Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen and walk you through we have a software called SoftEdge, and it's really easy to use for contacting legislators and our federal delegation as well. And so if you get our emails, and I hope you all do, there's often an alert in there, big red button, and it will send you to our action page. And so I'll show you where that is. So this is actually our home page that you're seeing right now. And you can see up here is the various tabs. If you click Take Action under Montana Legislature, it will take you to our action page. You can also click Take Action. This is an orange button that turns green when you hover over it. And I'm going to just click on that and bring us to the action page. So basically, it'll bring you to this page. Right now, we have 4 action items. We have a couple of state ones and a couple of federal ones. This first one, Preserve and Protect Social Security, is federal. But I'm going to scroll down just to show you the Public Service Commission, urging them to deny Northwestern Energy's proposed tax increase. And this is another federal one to protect Medicaid and SNAP. And these have all been covered on tonight's webinar. And then this was the SB 72 was the presumptive Medicaid eligibility that the governor vetoed. And so we're encouraging legislators to override the veto. So I'm going to go back up top and just click on, basically, we give you a backgrounder. So this is lots of information about the truths about Social Security, what Trump and Musk have been doing to try and, without saying that they're cutting Social Security, make it a lot more difficult to actually get it. So you just click the Take Action button, and it will ask you for your street address. And if you have done one of the actions before and you just click in there, it'll give you the option. This is my address, and I click Go. And then it will bring up the backgrounder again. So you can just scroll down if you've already read it. And then it will ask you to put your information in, and it will show you who the action is going to. You're welcome, if you're not wanting it to go to Steve Daines, you can unclick his name. And then the subject and the letter are all editable. So if you want to start from scratch and just, not put anything that we said, take it out, you can just delete the whole thing and put your own words in. You can add a story, like you may want to add a story about somebody in your family or a friend that has relied on Social Security, that type of thing. Those are really powerful, actually, and quite effective. So we encourage people to actually change the letters because, if somebody's getting lots of letters with the same verbiage, it has less impact, of course. So super easy to edit, and then you just edit it, put your information in, click send. You can also preview it to see what it looks like. These are The Remember Me is checked automatically so that, you know, if you click in there, you can automatically fill it out so you don't have to do it every time. And then emails in the future. So that is it. And I also, because there was a question in the Q&A about whether this webinar is being recorded, I just wanted to point out the legislative session bulletins page. And so this has the bulletins and the town hall recording. So you can see, if you want to go back to the 2023 legislative session, you can do that. But you can click on the 2025 legislative session, or if you only want to see the town hall recordings, you'll see all of those. So this one will join that one. Probably in the next couple of days. So this is being recorded and this is where it will live. So yeah, that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions also, but I will send it back to Terry.
Okay, thank you, Lila. That's great. And like I say, I get comments all the time from people saying this is the easiest website that they've been on in terms of quickly contacting their legislators. And Lila, do you have the number off the top of your head of how many contacts we made with legislators? Maybe Trent does.
Trent, do you have that on off the top? Oh, looks like 87,000.
Wow. Yes, we've got very informed, very interested members who are active in advocating for all of these great things that we care about. Here's another question. What is the status of the new constitutional amendment for abortion rights? Whoever wants to take that question.
I'm happy to jump in and answer that. That amendment passed, is in effect. Certainly, we saw, I think, some of the impact of that in the legislative session, in that several of the sort of standard run-of-the-mill anti-abortion policies that we see most legislative sessions did not pass. We did see some anti-abortion policies that mostly have to do with the regulation or lack of regulation of clinics. Those did pass. Likely we'll see a court challenge, but that constitutional amendment is in effect. It is in our Constitution. We are protected under it. And I think we can feel good about that.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, we're about to wrap up. On the chat, there's a link to our website to sign up for our weekly email updates. Let's put that up there so that you can join Big Sky 55 Plus if you're not already a member. If you're not already a member, or if you haven't contributed to Big Sky 55 Plus, we encourage you to do that. You know, ground support from the grassroots really helps us with our work. And if you're not lucky enough to be 55 or over, then your suggested dues are your age. So the younger, the better on that. We are going to, as Joan Baez said, action is the antidote to despair. And Big Sky 55 Plus works hard to give us the tools to take action together. We are co-sponsors of the No Kings rallies happening around the state on June 14th. I encourage everybody to come to rally against unchecked presidential power and for our democracy, for our beloved democracy. We're very excited to announce that we're organizing a Save Our Healthcare road trip this summer. And we'll be going all across the state to talk to members about healthcare. We have some exciting speakers lined up, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Watch for our emails and check our website to see when we're going to be in your town. We're always active on the federal and state level. We're looking for opportunities for you, our members, to weigh in on what is happening in the state and the nation. We look forward to working together as we use our superpowers to make Montana a better place to live and thrive for people of all ages. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to our wonderful panelists, and good night. Thank you, everybody.